Hello and welcome to Digital Brain, a blog dedicated to the digital art of video games, and in this video we'll be looking at the highlights and indeed the lowlights of the year 2017. So 2017 has been a year of extremes. It's probably the densest release schedule in years. We've had quality games coming out all of the time, and to be quite honest with you, it was often hard to know what to play. But our joy was often offset by constant industry shenanigans, as with the loot box controversies. Perhaps this year will be seen as a bit of a turning point for the industry. Predictably then, we start at January. The notable release for this month, especially for Digital Brain, is Yakuza 0. Now, I'm biased because I absolutely love Yakuza, but seeing a big mainstream release for this series over here in the West, in all its genre-bending glory, is absolutely wonderful. It's a story about treachery, it's a story about love and loss, it's a story where these kind of brooding Yakuza types just stare at each other for hours, and they just punch each other in the face, and it's really good. It's also a game where you get to disco dance like a total lunatic, you get to take part in your own personal music video, you get to go to karaoke bars and play arcade games, you get to run hostess bars. There's a lot to do in this game, and it's really silly sometimes, but the story does take itself dead seriously. But the rest of Yakuza is about as balmy as a talking top hat. It's just a game that's so full of idiosyncrasies that it's really impossible to dislike it, to be honest with you. It's also a really good entry point into the series for sort of newcomers. It kind of stitches in a lot of series staple characters into the storyline in a kind of prequel setting, set in a decadent 80s Tokyo. Again, it's really great to see Sega supporting this game again in the West. It's great to see them taking it seriously again, and I hope that that trend continues into 2018. So, moving on to February, saw the release of the absolutely fantastic Nioh on PS4 and later on PC. Nioh's probably one of my games of the year. It does what other Souls-likes often fail to do, which is be original, but not only that, it makes Souls-likes fun. It starts you off in kind of familiar Souls-like territory where you're underpowered, everything's quite difficult, and you soon start to learn the mechanics of the game, and you learn them so well that by the end of the game you're just kind of a demon. So that makes the skill ceiling quite high then, and that's underpinned by a really well-designed stance-based combat system. So if you haven't played Nioh because of the sort of boring Dark Souls comparisons, just please don't worry. Nioh takes that formula and kind of just totally runs away with it and becomes its own beast entirely. And I've personally gotten hundreds of hours of replay value out of it. So it definitely has depth going for it in spades. It's a really great game. It might be one of my games of the year. Also in February we saw Sniper Elite 4, which has slowly turned into one of the most underrated series this generation, I think. So Sniper Elite 4 is a hybrid of Metal Gear Solid 5, Splinter Cell, and sort of comic book World War II pulp, I suppose. You'll spend just as many hours scouting out these huge levels that constitute the game's play areas, and you'll probably spend a long time replaying them over and over again as well to find alternative routes and different paths and tweaking your tactics and strategies to beat the level. It also has a really good co-op component, so you can indulge in good old Nazi killing together with a friend. And, you know, it might not be Game of the Year material, but Sniper Elite 4 is currently the best it'll ever be. And it's just really great fun, and it kind of prioritises thinking before shooting, which I always really like in shooting games in general. So I love Sniper Elite 4, it's a really great game, and it is currently at its peak. March brought us the Nintendo Switch, a console that so far looks like it's going to be pulling Nintendo out of the hole they crawled into with the Wii U. The Switch is fantastic, I love it. I've got one myself, I think it's a really cool console. It's a handheld console hybrid that lets you make your gaming both portable and sort of more traditionally couch-based. The initial releases were a little bit slow this year, I think. They kind of trickled out every few months. But I think now that the whole year's behind us, I think it's really safe to call the Switch a huge success. And I'm really happy to see that. It's Nintendo, for God's sake. They're legends in the industry and they've always been there, and to see them die would be a massive shame. So the fact that the Switch has taken off as much as it has, to me, is very special, and I'm happy to see that. So as a console, it kind of lacks in technical horsepower, but I think, and I know this is what Nintendo will do, but I think what it lacks in horsepower, it'll make up for with great game design. That's kind of Nintendo's MO quite a lot of the time. So yeah, I love the Switch, and I'm really happy to see it succeed. Speaking of the Switch, the console probably launched with one of the best games this generation, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I really don't know where to start with this game. It throws off the expected Zelda tropes, but still manages to feel so uniquely Nintendo and like a Zelda experience. It seems to take a lot of influence from other big budget open world games, while at the same time completely skewering some of their most creatively redundant aspects. It feels really timeless, but it also feels completely modern and current and now. Breath of the Wild takes the Ubisoft model of game and just completely reinvents it. This isn't a game where you level up and get great loot and kill the baddie. This is the game where the open world isn't just your playground for your power fantasies. You're just a small part of this incredible world, and your journey through it is completely idiosyncratic and unique to you. There's just so much to say about this game that I would probably have to put it in its own video, but for now, this might be one of my favourite open world video games of recent times, and certainly one of the games of the generation. It really deserves all of the Game of the Year awards that it's gotten. It's a really great game. April saw the release of Yooka-Laylee, a game which seemed to be the victim of its own hype, unfortunately. It being made by ex-Rare staff seemed to give it this kind of exceptional glow of nostalgia, conjuring memories of Banjo-Kazooie, Mario 64, and the game is extremely successful in at least recapturing those warm rose-tinted memories, but it didn't really do much in terms of advancing the genre. So it's great for a really quick 20-hour callback to yesteryear, but the lack of innovation left a rather hollow print in its wake, I think. Outlast 2 was also released this month with a rather interesting and often underexplored premise of cult psychology, and man, I really wish they hadn't gone there. This was on my horizon for a number of reasons. Outlast was a fantastic horror game full of dark, awful misery, and this sequel looked as though it wasn't going to just echo its past, opting instead for a sort of brand new setting and a storyline into a topic that in real life is extremely fascinating. Oh dear though, this game handles the subject of cult psychology with all the subtlety of a nail bomb. The characters are awful, villainous caricatures. They read much more like comic book villains than cult of personality types. The gore and violence is way off the charts, skewering what could have been a terrifying portrayal of raw human psychology and boiling it down to just decapitations and stabbings and blood and guts and death and murder, and it just becomes dull background noise to what is essentially an uninteresting storyline. And you know, the experience itself is very slick, it's very polished, but the developers just seem to forget that when it comes to cults, fact is way stranger than fiction. In May we saw the release of Prey, which is a very nuanced and intelligent new take on the System Shock games of yore. The game flew under the radar somewhat thanks to a variety of really stupid factors, which makes this kind of a hidden gem to me. This is every bit as intelligent and impressive as older immersive sims, even more so to a certain extent. There's hints of John Carpenter's The Thing in Prey. Your enemies shapeshift and morph to trick you, kind of creates an uneasy relationship between yourself and the environment around you, and you'll often walk into a seemingly innocent looking room only to see a cup of coffee come to life and just attack you. It's very creepy and scary, and it's kind of wrapped in these deeply intelligent systems that make this one of my favourite games of the year actually. It's just a shame that it went away so unnoticed. The Surge also came out this month, looking to cash in on the Dark Souls formula but in a science fiction setting. Look, I mean, as I said earlier in this video, comparisons to Dark Souls have now become a little bit boring and cliche in the games industry, which is fine because Dark Souls is such a huge article of inspiration for so many people, myself included, but you have to try to be distinct from Dark Souls, you have to try and be different. And despite outward appearances, there isn't actually anything new or original about the Surge. The dismemberment mechanics are interesting, but eventually you just realise it's a way of customising loot drops from enemies. It doesn't actually affect the gameplay in any meaningful way, it doesn't actually change the ideas in the game by any stretch, and after you explore a few of the game's early areas you start to get that familiar Dark Souls feeling, and familiarity is where the Souls formula really starts to come apart at the seams. If you want to see a development team doing the Souls formula proud, I would really suggest playing Nioh, as mentioned earlier in the video. It's a really great game, and they've made the Souls genre work for them in a way that I think is quite unique. June saw the release of Elite Dangerous on PS4, and yes, I know this has been out on PC for a long time, but its release on consoles is quite an important milestone anyway. The Elite series is so representative of PC gaming. The term Elite itself has lingered in generations of PC gamers as the ultimate space exploration game, and the new edition on consoles doesn't compromise any of its PC credibility at all. It's really big, it's a bolshy game of complex cockpit systems and vast chasms of empty space, and with the discovery of a hidden alien race in Elite earlier this year, the online evolving storyline is only just beginning as well. But for other more casual players, the glacial pacing of Elite's minute-to-minute experiences might be too much. Regardless, this game being on consoles is a true revelation, indicative of changing attitudes to gaming and indeed game design on both PC and consoles. In July, the truly charming Yonder the Cloud Chronicles was released, and what a charming game. It's a non-violent exploration game and crafting game set in a beautifully colourful world. There's no misery, plight, death or extermination, no nastiness or evil. It's just a lot of roaming around and figuring things out. Its peaceful tone almost reminds me of Breath of the Wild in a way, but on a far less grander scale. Unfortunately, the game isn't very long, but the time you do spend with Yonder will be joyful and peaceful, and it's just a great game to relax to. August was a spectacular month with a huge array of great titles coming out in very quick succession. The first of those is the long-awaited release of early access darling The Long Dark. For me, this is perhaps the most successful iteration of exploration-based survival gaming to date. It manages to be punishing, while at the same time always giving the player the tools to dig themselves out of a really bad situation. It turns the screws at just the right moment and eases off when you've had too much. It perfectly balances the idea of surviving in a harsh world against being too cruel or too unfair, and always makes you feel as though you're just about getting by. It's underpinned by a wonderfully isolationist tone. You're a man or woman alone against the elements, against Mother Nature, and just watching this game in action made me feel a few degrees colder. The Long Dark is an extremely special game and achieves so many goals that other survival games just fail to achieve. And it's less about mindless object hoarding and more about the solitude at the heart of survival. Uncharted: The Lost Legacy focuses on fan favourite Chloe Frazer as she travels with Uncharted 4 villain Nadine Ross. The pair form a very unlikely duo in their journey through India to uncover hidden treasures. As usual for a Naughty Dog game, the standard here is extremely high. For an Uncharted game, especially an offshoot of Uncharted 4, it's par for the course, but when you take into account the incredible quality of the storytelling and voice acting in Naughty Dog's games, it's hard to ignore them when they come along. Uncharted: The Lost Legacy brings a tiny handful of new game mechanics, but not too much to write home about. The focus here is firmly on these characters and their bond and how they relate to that lovable rogue Nathan Drake. It's a fantastic segue for an amazingly well written series, and I hope that we actually see more from Chloe and Nadine, because it seemed to hint at more down the line, but I'm not too sure. It's a great game and I hope that they kind of pick up on this. Finally for August is another Yakuza game. Again, these games are incredibly important to Digital Brain, and who'd have thought we'd get two in 1 year. Obviously priming the Western market for more possible releases. Yakuza 6 after all is coming out next year. Kiwami is a full-on remake of the first original game released in the 2000s. It's a much more truncated and stripped down affair compared to the excellent Yakuza 0 from earlier in the year, but I found that to work in the game's advantage quite a lot. You still spend a lot of time involving yourself in much of the game's latent silliness, and the story is relatively untouched from the original, but the restraint on sheer numbers and length ensured a more tighter experience, and I didn't feel like the game felt more linear just because there was less stuff to do. This game introduces a Majima Anywhere system where the long-standing series maniac Majima can pop out of any nook and cranny on the map to attack you on the fly. It's a really great mechanic actually. It acts as sort of fulfilling filler content between missions and activities, and kind of helps flesh out your abilities and level up your character. And it's a really cool system and a really good entry into the Yakuza franchise, I think. And following on from August, we had another well-stocked month full of extremely high-quality work coming out. The first of those is Divinity Original Sin 2. It's a game I sunk well over 100 hours into and still didn't get anywhere close to finishing. It's probably one of my favourite games of the year, albeit with a rather odd caveat. It's just ever so slightly too long, and after 101 hours the fatigue really does start to set in. In this game, where each combat encounter needs to be fretted over and deliberated on to near perfection, to where the story hinges on lots of tiny moments of character development, and a world where detail is everything, I just felt really exhausted crossing the 100-hour mark. Regardless though, Original Sin 2 is a fantastic callback to character-based RPGs of yore. sort of RPGs that you don't really get anymore, unfortunately, and while playing this you'll probably conjure memories of Baldur's Gate and the classic Fallout games, but there are so many new and original ideas packed into this game that it manages to really modernise the genre and haul it out of its graveyard. There's great characters, there's great storytelling, and everything in this game puts you at the centre of a lot of grey areas and moral quandaries, and despite the humongous length, I could easily call this one of the games of the year. We're awash with Metroidvanias these days, and so many of them coast on previous formulas to get by, but SteamWorld Dig 2 is actually pretty incredible. Yes, it's a Metroidvania, but you explore the world by digging up dirt and uncovering secrets hidden in the mud and the rocks. You level up by mining gems from the blocks you break open and sending yourself up to the surface to sell them off to a merchant. It sounds really simple, but as a core gameplay loop it really works. The game dresses up exploration as a kind of digging game, where the gems you uncover as you go help you level up your character. It's a neat bit of design actually, and it helps distinguish SteamWorld Dig 2 from the pack and also makes it a lot of fun. It's also a really ideal game for the Nintendo Switch, and I've spent more time with this in docked mode than on the TV. It's a really fun game and a great soundtrack as well. Cuphead is something I spoke about a bit in my original video here on the channel, but I really have to reiterate how hard this game is. It's not really comparable to Dark Souls, even though I'm sure a lot of people probably do that. Dark Souls is hard, sure, but there's always a way forward and there's always a way to make things easier on yourself, and there is a kind of natural ebb and flow to the pacing of the game. Cuphead, however, screeches towards oblivion at kind of a million miles an hour in each level, and it's constantly attempting to kill you at all times. It's very, very intense and very consistent all throughout the game. It kind of forgoes that natural ebb and flow that other games may contain in favour of a more consistent level of difficulty. It's also really gorgeous, and obviously it's a labour of love for the designers, and fair play. The visual design is an absolute feast for the eyes, and congratulations to them for ensuring that, especially without having to push your system hardware to the limit to do so. It's a tough and brutal game that will consistently thrill you to the end. Wolfenstein 2 made the headlines for all the right reasons in October for featuring alt-right baiting marketing, which had a gif of a Nazi soldier being punched in the face. All in good fun, I thought, but apparently history's most awful people took offence to it. I mean, it's a shame really, because they're missing out on a swaggering, confident shoot-'em-up that has bags of attitude. You'll go from machine gunning Nazis, to blowing up factories, to forming alliances with the shattered remnants of a post-war Nazi-occupied America. Wolfenstein 2's narrative swaggers knee-deep into controversy and comes out swinging like a champion, but what's most surprising is the amount of spot-on tone shifts the story takes the player on throughout its 15-hour duration. There's some great character development here, and actually really well-written emotional moments that are sprinkled through some of the good old-fashioned misfit versus the establishment storytelling. Now, November is the month we will slowly start to realise that the Switch's sales pitch may actually be paying off. This month saw the release of a few ports to the Switch, as well as the realisation that the Switch library has gone from being quite meagre to extremely healthy. The Switch storefront itself has become something of a curated, hand-picked selection of games that feel right at home on a hybrid console. Doom seems to be a miracle of a port, along with LA Noire, as flawed as it is. Skyrim and games like Golf Story, Slime Sand, SteamWorld Dig 2, among others. It's blossomed over the course of the year into something really special, and it's a great hybrid console, coupled with a really well curated storefront, which kind of means that the Switch has become something really amazing. November is also a month we paradoxically learned what the AAA game industry actually values. Over the course of the month, the reveal of loot boxes into Star Wars Battlefront 2 caused such an uproar that at some point Disney had to step in to check everything was okay. The loot boxes were temporarily removed, and as of the time of writing, their future is still not actually certain. This had a huge knock-on effect across the industry, as several big profile games have started to also dump microtransactions as a result of EA's gigantic mess up. Not to mention EA stocks plummeting by $3 billion. It's still too early to see how much damage microtransactions has had on the industry just yet, and EA themselves have actually stated they aren't dumping microtransactions altogether, but the slight shift in tone is still relatively crucial, and personally speaking, this is good. From a cultural viewpoint, paywalls really seriously devalue the artistic intent of a game, and the game industry has and always will be a corporate-centered industry. But if you take a look at the film industry, it's really hard to imagine a world where you'd have to pay for extra lines of dialogue or alternative endings, so good riddance to bad rubbish. Now, this is somewhat premature and strange, but PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is due for release this December on the 20th, but seeing as its wild success this year is so all-consuming, it seems fitting to stick this on the end of the year regardless. PUBG came from nowhere into an industry beleaguered with microtransaction controversy and has gone on to be more successful than anything else this year. It's really not hard to see why either. It's a brilliantly designed battle royale game where tension, fear and primal human survivor instinct plays a pivotal role in each game. This is a game where the distinct crackle of gunfire isn't just background noise, it's information of a potential problem. It's a game where something as innocuous as an open door is indication of a possible ambush. A game where a gun with no ammunition is indication of someone having already passed through. And you'll need those breadcrumbs of information because in PUBG's hectic playground, one wrong move could mean instant death. Now, it's been in early access all year and it's already widely regarded as a multiplayer classic, way ahead of its release this December, and it's only improved over the year. In a year full of opposites where we had some of the best games coming out against some of the most egregious and offensive examples of rampant consumerism ever in gaming, PUBG is a beacon leading the way in not just great game design, but also as a pure success story. So in summary then, I think that 2017 has been an absolutely fantastic year. There's been really a lot of great games coming out this year, and it's really good to see, and I think it's going to be hard to follow, to be quite honest with you. So far 2018 looks like it may have some great games coming out. I'm really looking forward to Monster Hunter World, which I think releases in February. There's also some really great stuff coming out across the course of the year, I'm sure. But the thing that's really interesting about 2017 is the loot box controversy, which seemed to come to a logical conclusion in November. I don't think it will really represent some sort of seismic shift in the industry, but it will become a bit of a selling point whether your game has microtransactions or not. And I do think that game developers should really seriously avert their gaze when it comes to considering games as service. So games like Destiny, some of the upcoming stuff from Blizzard as well, I just think it's really dangerous. I think that game design that centers around hooking in players for a long period of time, hooking them in with these sort of dopamine hits, these breadcrumb trails of rewards, I think it's really dangerous. Personally speaking, not damaging to you as a person. I'm sure you'll be fine. Even if you got addicted, I'm sure you'll be fine. It's just, it more speaks of a cynicism in consumerism, really. So that's what really bothers me about the microtransaction stuff. And if you're the sort of person that sees the art in video games, then you see microtransactions as a kind of intrusion from these corporate influences, and games of service is their logical end result. So I am a bit worried about that, but I think because of Star Wars Battlefront 2 this year, there will be a slight shift in tone. And really, I think this is a great opportunity for indie games to step up to the plate, and for indie developers, and developers such as Ninja Theory, who made Hellblade this year. I think they could easily show us the way. They could really push through with this. As scary as this all is, I think this is a really good opportunity for indie developers to take the torch and run with it, basically. So yeah, it's been an absolutely fantastic year. I think that's all we're going to talk about for now. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I don't upload videos too often on this channel, but I do like to make these videos, so I will be making more of them. The main event is really on digitalbrainblog.com, which is my blog. We write about games over there, we write about culture, music, cinema, mainly focusing on games, but we also discuss other things on there as well. It's more of a digital culture blog. So please go to digitalbrainblog.com and have a look. So that's it. That's me signing off. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year.